The fog peeled back like worn fabric, exposing the first pale shimmer of dawn above the Atlantic. The transport ship's hull cut through a glassy sea, silent except for the rhythmic clap of waves against steel. On deck, dozens of German women stood shoulder to shoulder, collars turned high against the cold spray. They had been told the voyage would last 2 weeks. It had taken 16 days and even longer hours. Salt caked the hems of their coats. The air smelled of diesel, metal, and fear. Anna Weiss, once a train clerk from Hanover, felt the weight of the ocean pull inside her ears. She was neither soldier nor nurse, just one of many auxiliaries folded into the machinery of defeat. Now she was cargo. Her hands, dry and cracked from salt water, held the railing so tightly the knuckles whitened against the dark iron. Behind her, someone murmured a prayer. Another whispered a single, electrified word, America. Until that moment, America existed only as shadow or slogan in the posters she had pasted for the Reich. Here, miles west of any memory, the word carried shape. The fog brightened. Beyond it, cranes and spires rose like exclamation marks against a gray horizon. New York Harbor came into view intact, humming, unfamiliar. No ruins, no craters, no muzzle flashes. It looked peaceful to the point of insult expectation tightened every spine. The women prepared themselves for shouting, for guards with dogs, for the humiliation of being paraded through jeering crowds. A trumpet of ship horns echoed across the bay. Instead of soldiers with whips, they saw harbor police guiding the vessel toward an empty pier lined with jeeps and Red Cross ambulances. An American sergeant waved his arm in a lazy circle, the gesture more exhausted than angry. When the ship docked, sunlight cut through fog for the first time in weeks, a warm blade across the steel deck. Anna squinted. Everything glistened. The wet ropes, the brass buttons on uniforms, even the crusted salt flecks on her sleeve. Then she caught the scent coffee, sweet and impossibly strong. She followed it down the gangway. On the pier, a nurse in a spotless apron handed each woman a tin cup and something round and red, an apple. It smelled of harvests untouched by war, an impossible fragrance. Anna took it gingerly, expecting it to vanish like rumor. No one smiled. Politeness made faces stiff. Every simple kindness cut deeper than cruelty could. When a translator explained that the women would be processed, not punished, murmurs spread through the line like wind through wheat. Expectation, vengeance, and shame. Reversal, rules, routine, and restraint. As the women boarded the waiting train marked U.S Army POW transport, engines hissed into motion. The bay behind them disappeared in sheets of mist, but the smell of apples lingered, the scent of disbelief ripening into memory. By the spring of 1945, the war no longer fit inside Europe. The United States, its oceans still untouched by enemy shellfire, had become a vast storage yard for the conflict's aftermath. Across 46 states, prisoner compounds bloomed almost overnight. Small wooden cities where discipline replaced retribution. Most held men, soldiers from Africa, sailors from U-boats, airmen shot down over France. But scattered among them, often in their own guarded sections, arrived a rarer curiosity of the war female captives of the German Reich. They came not as combatants, but as auxiliaries, clerks, typists, telecommunication staff, nurses, and transport workers swept up when their posts collapsed. The War Department had never written a manual for them. No American guard had expected to salute a woman in a field gray uniform with her boots still bearing Army inventory numbers. The paperwork didn't even have gender boxes until someone added F in careful pencil. The train that carried Anna Weiss and 200 others rolled west from New York Harbor into days that felt more dream than punishment. At night, the cars rocked gently. American MPs paced the aisles smoking Lucky Strikes, while the prisoners dozed on straw mattresses. by morning sunlight poured through smudged windows, illuminating a countryside too orderly to be believable. White barns, picket fences, children riding bicycles on farm roads. The war seemed an abstract rumor here, reduced to newsprint and postage stamps. For women who had crawled through rubble only weeks earlier, the clarity of this landscape was almost indecent. Their final destination lay in Texas, Camp Swift, a sprawling facility outside Bastrop known for its heat and vastness. The compound could house 10,000 men, more than the population of the county itself. Within its fences, the new arrivals found an area cordoned by additional wire and a sign reading Section W Special Detail. That designation meant two things: female prisoners and the Americans' uncertainty about what to do with them. Daily life blossomed into a pattern so formulaic it bordered on kindness. They rose to bugle call at 6, answered roll in a mixture of broken English and German, then filed to breakfast oatmeal sweetened with molasses, bread piled in mountains they could not exhaust. In the compound library, English primers sat beside Bibles printed in both languages. Afternoons offered light tasks: repairing uniforms, packing Red Cross supplies, tending the camp's vegetable garden under guard watch. A medical orderly once explained the schedule with a shrug: busy hands, peaceful minds. What shocked them most wasn't generosity, but equality. Guards held doors, saying "ma'am" out of reflex. Orders were given politely, rarely twice. A sergeant even scolded another for swearing within earshot. Those gestures, habitual, thoughtless civility, landed harder than firearms ever could. Anna Weiss wrote later that America conquered her differently, with decency so thorough it felt strategic. Outside, life continued without fear. On Sundays, local farm families parked along the perimeter road to watch the odd scene of German women hanging laundry beside smaller groups of male prisoners under supervision. Teenage girls from Bastrop pointed, curious, whispering to each other, "They look just like us." Sometimes gifts appeared left anonymously at the gate: books, combs, sewing scissors, hand lotion, even lipstick sent for the enemy ladies. The guards joked about Texas hospitality going too far, but made no effort to stop it. Letters from home arrived through Geneva. Most were fragments, addresses obliterated by bombs, sentences ended abruptly mid-line. One day a package came for Anna containing nothing but a half-burned photograph of her street. She murmured, "Alles weg." All gone. The American interpreter on duty looked down and said softly, "Start somewhere new." It wasn't sympathy, it was practicality, and perhaps that difference made it sting less. Over months the women adapted. They organized sewing circles, a choir that practiced evening hymns, and a makeshift school where one former teacher gave lessons in Spanish, learned from guards, men in neighboring compounds, sent notes hidden in bread loaves, flirtation written like diplomacy. "You sing good start peace soon." The uncertain future felt lighter beneath prairie skies than beneath any burning city expectation. Captivity as shame. Reversal, captivity as curriculum, a daily apprenticeship in quiet freedoms. By midsummer, when the rains came and the Texas clay turned red underfoot, the women began to refer to their section of the camp not as prison, but simply the quarters. They had learned the clock of America, breakfast whistles, washing lines snapping in the wind, the reliable promise of supper served on time. It was strange to realize that the first peace they'd ever experienced came fenced and numbered. Summer baked the Texas hills to the color of brass. The cicadas whined like static in the heat, and the air above the barracks shimmered as though smoke still lingered from another continent. For the women in Section W of Camp Swift, the routine hardened into habit, predictable, clock-bound, almost reassuring. Then, imperceptibly, habit began turning into belonging. At first, interaction between German prisoners and American guards was formal, a theater of manners performed by people uncertain of the script, but monotony is persuasive. Each day blurred into the next roll call at dawn, farm work after breakfast, sewing under shade awnings through the long afternoons. Barriers eroded not through confrontation, but through repetition. An American sergeant guarding the laundry line began humming a tune from a public radio broadcast. A voice inside the compound softly joined in with the German version of the same melody. They both laughed, startled, embarrassed, and kept working. The camp's commandant encouraged recreation as therapy. Victors and vanquished alike needed equilibrium. One Saturday, he allowed a joint picnic between female POWs and local townspeople, fully supervised. The site was a grassy patch along the Colorado River. 14 miles from the camp gate, American provost trucks ferried the women, their uniforms replaced by plain cotton dresses sewn from surplus cloth. They arrived wearing expressions of practiced caution, the faces of people entering yet another uncertainty. When picnic baskets opened, the air filled with smells of fried chicken, corn, and soap-washed linen. A farm wife offered potato salad to the woman beside her. It took minutes before conversation began, but only seconds for instinct to replace ideology. Spoons clinked, shy laughter mingled with cicadas. As the sun fell, one of the local teenagers produced a harmonica. An older German nurse, Marta, answered his tune with a kelp-green accordion she'd salvaged in France, and kept through capture-soon country music, traded bars with village waltzes. Every note loosened something that propaganda had cinched tight for years. A few guards shifted uncomfortably, unsure what line had just vanished. The commandant merely observed and wrote in his log later that evening, "Music remains efficient, detainer for spirit, no incidents." Back in camp, small exchanges turned into rituals. Guards began leaving the morning newspaper on the women's side of the fence. Anna Weiss practiced English headlines aloud to laughter from both ranks. In return, the prisoners offered embroidery and stitched initials USA into handkerchiefs for the men's own mail kits. Each gift embarrassed its receiver because in peacetime it would have been impossible. The humiliation of defeat softened under the discipline of kindness that neither side had expected. The irony deepened when a dust storm swept through central Texas that August barracks flooded and power failed for 2 nights. With the infirmary generator down, American nurses carried lanterns to the hospital tent where German orderlies volunteered to help, sterilizing instruments, changing dressings, even calming the shivering recruits from a nearby artillery unit also brought inside temporarily. The boundary between captor and captive dissolved entirely in those moments, an unrecorded treaty, made in the smell of alcohol and rain. Later, when a new shipment of POWs arrived straight from collapsing Europe, hollow-eyed, hardened by ruins, the older prisoners met them with something dangerously close to pride. "The Americans keep order," they whispered. "You will eat, you will work, you will sleep without bomb sirens." To Europeans trained to expect cruel victors, this sounded less like reassurance than impossible luxury. But within weeks they too measured life by the serving spoons in the mess hall, by the punctual rattle of farm trucks collecting them each morning. Anna became interpreter for the camp tailor shop after the previous translator was repatriated. Standing each afternoon with ledger in hand, she found herself speaking English automatically. "Thank you. Finish tomorrow. Button here." Her accent softened until even the guards teased her by calling her Kansas Anna. Once, when she offered one of them a mended shirt through the wire, he removed the needle from the cuff and said quietly, "You sew straighter than my mother." It was not flirtation, it was admission that defeat could still produce excellence, expectation, captivity as living proof of failure, reversal, captivity as education in civility, where the defeated discovered poise their ideology had burned away. That autumn, a U.S. Army photographer visited Camp Swift to document humanitarian conditions for the Red Cross. He photographed the women tending the vegetable garden, faces half hidden under straw hats, vegetables piled in baskets beside smiling guards. When the pictures reached Europe months later, they provoked disbelief. In Nuremberg and Berlin, people whispered, "They smile under the enemy flag," unaware that the smile wasn't loyalty but relief. For the first time, some captives realized that freedom was not a place, but a behavior. By the spring of 1946, the cicadas quieted, and the fences of Camp Swift no longer buzzed with rumor. The war had drained from the world like water from droughted earth. Repatriation orders arrived in waves of typed carbon, pinned to bulletin boards between the day's menu and weather reports. The women read the lists with the stunned composure of people who had stopped believing in change. Next to Weiss, Anna, Section W, someone had penciled a departure date, June 12th. In the weeks that followed, the compound became something else, a rehearsal for farewells. Guards and prisoners moved through the same motions, awkwardly formal again, neither sure how to revert to the beginning. The Americans cleaned rifles they would never raise. The Germans washed floors that would soon belong to no one. On the last Sunday, the commandant allowed a service without translation. An army chaplain read from the Psalms while the women sang fragments of home hymns. In the Texas heat, their voices trembled, half German, half English, meeting like two exhausted travelers at a crossroads. Anna spent her final day packing the camp equivalent of luggage, a Red Cross blanket, 2 letters of recommendation for clerical work, one from an American sergeant, 3 photographs of the tailor shop, and a paper packet sealed with violet ribbon. Inside rested the apple seeds she had saved from the first fruit given to her on the New York dock. She had dried them carefully, intending to plant them someday. The gesture felt absurd, sentimental, but not useless. Departure morning arrived humid and windless. Trucks lined the parole road, engines idling like heavy animals. The guards stood 3 abreast for roll call. When Anna's name echoed down the roster, she didn't answer with her number. Old habit would have demanded 2684. Instead, she said, "Here," in clear English. The guard checking boxes hesitated, then nodded, eyes darting quickly to the ground as though embarrassed by gratitude. Before the trucks left the gate, one of the cooks, a man whose face she barely knew, tossed paper-wrap parcels into the back, biscuits, hard candy, and small jars of jam labeled by hand. A nervous laugh rippled through the rows of passengers. War rarely supplied souvenirs. Across miles of sleeping prairie, train cars loaded with former prisoners connected like beads on a wire. From Topeka to St. Louis to the Atlantic ports, America rolled past their windows, a country clean, busy, seemingly untouched. When the ship bearing them east finally departed Newport News, Virginia, it sailed into seas now empty of submarines. On its deck, the women leaned against the rails again, facing the opposite horizon. Anna turned the apple seeds over in her palm. They looked smaller than she remembered. A nurse beside her asked softly, "Will you plant them?" She replied, "If the ground lets me." Months later, she stood on the edge of her village outside Hanover and looked at what remained of domestic civilization, a single brick facade, a pump handle, children playing among hollowed-out shells of houses. Even the air carried fatigue instead of fear. Life resumed in fragments, teaching, ration lines, rebuilding. It would take years before laughter returned without apology, but among those who had been to America, something invisible persisted. They knew the enemy's handwriting in kindness the way a cup of coffee could feel like truce or a fence could guard safety instead of threat. In letters to one another, the women of Section W spoke often of ordinary American things: the scent of soap, punctual trains, the way guards said yes, ma'am, without irony. None of them described vengeance because it had never come. What they remembered most was structure, the quiet morality of a system that fed its prisoners before interrogating them. That memory, more than any ideology, survived both nations' propaganda. War teaches people how to destroy, but captivity taught them how to behave. And sometimes the first day in an enemy's realm becomes the first day of one's humanity.